Once you have figured out your audience and you understand your purpose, you can work on writing your resume. So we're going to start by looking at the rhetorical situation of a resume. Winning resumes understand the organization and the job's demands. They offer a good match for that job and bring value to the company. And they prove credibility with proof of accomplishments. So we're going to keep those things in mind as to what the winning resumes do and how do we get there with the rhetorical situation. The goal of a resume is to move a candidate forward in the hiring process and ultimately to secure the job. So the first step is to move you forward. You want to create a resume that includes all of the important information that is going to get you through the initial screening. The work that your resume does, is it supposed to communicate your suitability for the job? It also demonstrates your ability to communicate in writing, especially when paired with the cover letter. So it has two functions, and both functions are important. The audience is, ultimately it's the company, but within that company, it could be a hiring manager, it could be a hiring committee, and that committee could be composed of representatives from human resources, executives, if it's a high enough position in the company, supervisors, and other team members, people you'd be working closely with. And that may be, a multi-step process here that that your resume is going to go to human resources, to the hiring manager or the screener, whoever it receives them and takes care of them to begin with. And then it's going to go through some screening processes, and then depending on the company, its structure, its size, and what your position is that you're applying for, it could go to different places and people after that. What you want to do is you want to be sure that you research the company. You want to spend time on their website and any social media channels that they have. You want to look for current employees on LinkedIn and read about them, read their resumes there. You want to talk to people who work for the company, if you do know anyone. And you want to design a resume that is suitable for the company culture. And remember, it is better to go a little more formal than a little more informal. So even if it's a fairly informal company, if you look at their social media, you look at their website, and you see people who are very casual, and everything seems pretty laid back, you still want to come in a little bit more formal than that, so that you show that you're serious. But if it is a very casual company, you don't want to come in too formal, because you do want to show that you're suitable for that company. At the same time, if this is a very formal company, you don't want to come in and present yourself as someone who is too casual for that company. So do your research. Don't just say, oh, this company looks good, I've heard this name before, but do your research and really get to know everything you can about that company before you even start to put your resume together. When you do get to that resume, after you've understood your purpose, which is to move forward in the hiring process, you've understand your audience because you've done your research, then you're looking at content. And there are, depending on who you talk to, there are 5 or 6 commonly accepted areas of content. You're always going to find on a list the identifying information, your name and contact information. We'll talk about more of these categories in a few moments. We're just going to summarize them right now. But then you're going to have a summary statement. Sometimes it'll be called an objective. Summary statement and objective are a little bit different. I believe your handbook goes into some detail on that information. So if you haven't read that already, you should. But we're going to just talk about summary statement for our purposes. Education, you have to include your education, you have to include your experience. You may treat skills as a separate section if that applies to you and to the position that you are applying for. And then you may have awards and accomplishments that you want to highlight on your resume. A couple of notes about content are important. First, you want every resume that you create should be adapted to a specific job posting. So you can have kind of a general resume sort of template that you use, but you should make a separate copy of that and then tailor that separate copy to the specific job posting. One of the reasons is that you have to include the right keywords. Many companies, in fact, most companies these days, including GRCC, are using software to scan resumes for particular keywords. You need to make sure you're including the right keywords. So how do you get the right keywords? First of all, study the job description in the post. Make note of those important words that they say that they want you to have, that they want the right candidate to have. Then don't just stop there though. Find 10 more ads for similar positions and identify the most frequently repeated terms, especially ones that also appear in the description that you're for the job you are going to apply for. Make a list of those and then integrate them into sentences about your skills and accomplishments, as many of them as you can. The more of these keywords that you can include in your resume, the better. And you need to make sure you can include them appropriately. You're not just like listing them somewhere, because that's not going to get you anywhere. But you also have to make sure they really do apply to you. Is one of the things we've talked about is being ethical, being truthful. So you need to represent yourself accurately, honestly. So don't put something in that, if it's asking for a particular programming language, don't include that you know that programming language unless you really do. And then you also are going to be presenting your education and experience in reverse chronological order. So the most recent part of your education goes first. The most recent job goes first, and then you work backwards. So with those content notes in mind, we can go on and talk a little bit about ethics. We just mentioned it, but you have a responsibility to tell the truth. You cannot overinflate your accomplishments, skills, or responsibilities. If a prospective employer finds information that contradicts what you have in your resume or in your cover letter, they will most likely not spend any more time considering you as a candidate. And if you already work for that company, there's a possibility you could even get fired if your employer finds out that you have misrepresented yourself. So for everything that you've written, that you write in your resume and in your cover letter, ask yourself, are you willing to take responsibility for it? Have you been truthful and honest? Are you acting in your own best interests? And if applicable, your employer's best interests? Have you violated anyone's rights? We've talked about right to privacy, right to loyalty. Have you violated any of those rights? And how will your reader interpret what you've written? So you can't always know the answer to that question, but you can consider, how can my writing be interpreted? What are the different ways? Is there a possibility that what I've written can be interpreted in a way that is not truly reflective of who I am, what I've accomplished, what I'm able to do? So let's talk about those individual parts of the resume. You need to have a header, usually. It's usually the header, it should be, that includes your identifying information. So you should have your first and last name. You do not have to include your middle name unless you want to. You should not have any titles. Don't put Mr. John Smith on there. Just put John Smith. The font that you use in the header where you have your name should be the largest font used in the body of your resume. You shouldn't be using any decorative fonts and no shaded backgrounds. Don't get too fancy. Remember, a lot of times these get scanned into a computer so that they can be analyzed through some software, and you want to make sure that they're readable. Also, if you're submitting electronically, a lot of times companies will still print these off for people on a hiring committee. So you want to make sure that anything you have on your resume can easily be printed. You also want to include your contact information. That should include your permanent address. If you have a school address and a home address, you want to include both and label them clearly, because employers may try to contact you at one versus the other, and they need to know which is which. You want to have a professional looking email address, usually your first and last name at whatevermail.com works, at gmail.com or whatever works fine. Or like a first initial last name, something like that. You don't want like smartypants246 at coolmail.com, because that's just not a professional email address. And you want to include your phone number. Now, one thing I want to remind you of when we talked about this in the job search one is that you do not want to include this more personal information on a resume that you're going to upload to a job board. Okay, if you are sending it directly to a company, you can include all of this information. But if you're going to put it up on a job board, it's a really bad idea to put that much information about yourself up there, because you don't know exactly who can see it and when. So just be smart. All right. Summary statement. A summary statement is a 3 to 5 line narrative stating why readers should be interested in you. It should show how you match what they want. So here's an example that comes from your technical writing handbook, your handbook of technical writing. And it is for an arts administrator, art historian, practicing artist. Experience and advanced training in archiving, preservation, and photography. Special expertise in designing computer systems to perform administrative work more efficiently and economically. Adept at training people to use new technologies cheerfully. On every job, recognized as the go-to person when computer glitches happen. You could probably guess that maybe some of the keywords would be like archiving, preservation, photography, designing computer systems, administrative work. Those might be some of the keywords that the job posting might have, or that many job postings for this kind of work might have. And you can also notice here that there are no subjects in these sentences. They're not complete sentences. That is fairly typical when it comes to resumes. Resumes are not the place where you're going to demonstrate that you can write a complete, correct grammatical sentence. That's for your cover letter, but you still have to communicate clearly. And this particular summary statement does that. It gives specific information about what this person has done in these roles as arts administrator, art historian, and practicing artist. The next section that most of you, or many of you, I should say, will include was probably going to be education. So education and work experience. If you are a recent student or a current student who's about to graduate who is applying for jobs, you would probably put your education section before your work history. And that's just because this is probably the more robust section that you have. Now, many of you I know in this class are also working full-time jobs. Some of you are established in careers and you're taking this class for a variety of different reasons. And so you might choose to put your work experience first because that's the stronger part of your resume. And then your education might fall after that. So you have to kind of make that decision for yourself based on what works best for you and the job you're applying for. But when you do compose your education section, you need to include the schools, the colleges, universities you've attended, degrees you've received and dates you've received them, or in the case of people who are about to graduate or graduating in the next couple of semesters, you would want to put the expected date of the degree. The major field of study, if you have a single major or a double major, a minor if it's relevant to the position you're applying for. You want to include any academic honors if you have them. Include your GPA, but only if it's a 3.0 or higher and it's earned recently. Now, you can decide you don't want to include your cumulative GPA for your whole education. What you may decide is that you're going to include the GPA only for the courses in your major. And that's legit because those are the courses that most apply most of the time to the job that you're going to apply for. So including that, and sometimes that's much higher, often I would say that's much higher than a cumulative GPA might be. You may choose to include only the GPA for your final 2 years of your coursework because that's where all of your advanced courses in your major are. It really depends on what you're trying to show about yourself and what's going to be the strongest representation that would meet the needs of your employer. So if the job you're applying for, if that company really values well-rounded people with broad educations, you might want to just stick with that full cumulative GPA. But if they're really stressing someone who is very solidly academically prepared in that particular field, then maybe you want to just narrow it down to those kinds of courses and include the GPA for that. You should list individual courses only if you have courses that are unusually impressive, that they provide the opportunity to include keywords and that they're relevant to your career goals. Otherwise, you don't really need to include individual courses. But I will say it's not a bad idea to make a list for yourself of the relevant courses that would apply to a particular job. That way you have that kind of accessible to you in preparing for an interview, so that when you go into the interview, it's fresh in your mind. You can share, these are the courses I've taken that are relevant to this position. And for some of you, you may prefer that than listing them on your resume anyway. You can include skills that you've developed or projects completed in coursework if they're particularly relevant to the job you're applying for. You don't need to mention high school unless that's the highest education you've received, and that's fine. If that's as far as you've gone, then that's, we want to see, employers want to see your highest level of education. And you don't really need to include any high school achievements, awards, projects, unless they are particularly impressive, unique, relevant to the career, showing that you've had this long-standing interest in this particular field of study, this career, that kind of thing, or they demonstrate something that that company is looking for. But mostly you're going to be concentrating on your college. And you don't want to include only the school that you get your degree from, any college you attend. So those of you who are in this class as guest students from another institution, you would still include GRCC on your resume because you've taken at least this class and possibly other classes at GRCC, even if you haven't earned a degree there. So I have a couple of institutions on my resume that I haven't earned a degree from, but I've earned various credits from. For example, Grand Valley, I've taken some advanced master's level courses in writing and teaching writing and research. I'm not getting a degree in any particular thing, but I've taken those courses really for professional and personal development. And so I do have those, I have a transcript from Grand Valley, and that does appear on my resume. Experience. You have a couple of options for demonstrating your experience, your work history. The most common organizational structure for the work history part of a resume is reverse chronological, where you begin with the most recent job and you work backward under a single heading of employment history, work history, experience, however you want to call that. That's the most common, and that tends to be what is most useful for, especially for new graduates, for people who don't have as much experience in the workforce, people who've maybe only had one or two jobs, like they've only worked for one or two companies before, people who are just don't really have another reason to organize it in any other way. The other option, though, is a functional or sometimes a skills-based resume, where you would group similar types of jobs into several sections with specific headings, like they could be management and or project management, team management, or different kinds of things, different kinds of headings in there, administration, faculty kind of stuff. And then you put different skills, different experiences under those headings. That is something that is useful for people who are possibly making a career shift. They've been in one industry for a while and now they want to change to something completely different. That is something that works for people who maybe have a work history and then they took time off for something. Maybe it was to raise a family, maybe it was caregiving for a relative who, needed intensive care on a regular basis. Maybe it was to go back to school and get different education training, get another degree or something. There are different reasons why people might have gaps in their work history. And so this functional resume might work better because the focus is on the work that they have done, the skills that they've developed, the accomplishments that they have, rather than on the timeline of the jobs. Whichever structure you choose, you need to include the jobs and experiences that directly relate to the position you're seeking, extracurricular activities if they demonstrate skills valued by the employer. So if you were a tennis player or if you play golf, whether on a team or recreationally, those are things that, you know, kind of can come in handy. That there are many corporate golf outings and, you know, having the ability to play tennis or another racket sport with your team members or your boss or whatever, you know, that can come in handy, or even with clients and that. Military service. You should definitely include your military service if you have that. That's a job and you should treat it as such. So make sure that you include military service if that applies to you. For the specific entries, you need to have the job title and employer name. You can put the employer name first and the job title second, or you can put the job title first and the employer name second. You need to determine which one is going to be more important or more impressive to the company that you're applying for, and you want to be consistent. So all the way through for every entry, it should go in the same way. Job title employer, job title employer, job title employer, or flip those around, but keep it consistent all the way. You need a concise description of your accomplishments. And you want to represent the scope of your abilities by creating a brief paragraph outlining responsibilities. You can follow that by a bulleted list of strongest accomplishments. And you want throughout to use active action verbs. If you don't know what active action verbs are, you want to research that. You want to ask the Language Arts Lab, you want to ask me, but those are the verbs that are saying what you have actually accomplished. You may end up having a section where you show particular highly valuable skills, or you may show your professional development courses that you've taken. So skills that you should include would be fluency in a foreign language. If you are fluent or near fluent in a particular foreign language, you definitely want to include that on your resume. There are so many companies that work globally that find second language speakers very valuable. And that could set you apart from another candidate who does not have that or the same level of fluency. If you have particular writing and editing abilities, you could share that. If you have specialized technical knowledge, you want to put that there. If you have certain computer skills like specific programming languages, software that you understand, you develop, you work with, hardware that you work with, and the skills to do what needs to be done with those. Those are important things to include in your skills. You do not want to include very broad things like team player. You want to show that you are a team player through your accomplishments, but you don't want to put that down as a skill. You don't want to put down like a good communicator as a skill. Those are the things that they expect. Those are not things that you want to have just written randomly on your resume. You should be demonstrating that through the way you write your resume, the way you write your cover letter, but not listing them as a line item. And then professional development can include any courses that you've taken, workshops that you've been to, training you've participated in. So, you know, things like, say you have CPR training, that would be a professional development thing that you could put in there. CPR and first aid, you know, other kinds of workshops, public speaking workshops, or video editing workshops, things that would be relevant to your professional development, particularly for that position you're applying for. And then you may have a section of awards and accomplishments if that applies to you. And those could be, for many of you, they might be student or community activities, professional memberships. Think of, some of the professional organizations have student chapters. That would be a good thing for you to look into, to see if there are professional organizations in your field that have a student chapter at your institution. If so, you should join that. It's not just a line item on your resume, but it's also a great place for networking and potentially for scholarships and internships and all kinds of opportunities that come up when you have those groups. So take advantage if you can. Any relevant club memberships, awards that you've received, and whether those are academic awards or community awards or employer awards, if they're relevant to what you're trying to apply for, include them on your resume. And then any work that you've had published, whether you've been the primary or if you have been a researcher, part of a research team as an undergraduate, and your professor or whoever had the paper published, if your name's on it, include it. But only include the things that will support your employment objective. Use an appropriate heading like awards and accomplishments or just accomplishments, and don't duplicate information. So if you included certain awards or published works in your academics, in your education section, don't include it in a separate awards and accomplishments section as well. One place or the other, but not both. All right. So when you look at these slides, this does link to a document that gives basically all of the information that we've talked about in a checklist format. And so you should take a look at that so you know exactly what's expected of you for your resume assignment. But here's the information as well, not all of it, but the basics of it is here. So you're going to start by choosing a job post. Find a post for what could be your dream job right now. I mean, maybe that'll change in a couple of years, but right now, look through those job posts and what could be a dream job. Some of you have already found that, or one that works well enough in the job analysis, the job post analysis assignment. Some of you may not have found anything that was like a dream job. Maybe you want to keep looking. So then you are going to analyze that post carefully so you know what the employer is looking for in the ideal candidate. And then you'll create a resume that presents yourself as the ideal candidate. Now, let's talk about this. We've already talked about how you need to be ethical. So I'm not asking you to lie here, but I am asking you to sort of project. Some of you will need to project a little farther than others because you're all at different points in your education and training and that. So that's why I say, like, what could be your dream job right now? You can project that you would have certain skills and qualifications and accomplishments if you were to apply for this job. So maybe you're going to boost your resume a little bit based on what you think you would have accomplished in the next 2 years, if that's when your expected graduation date is and when you would realistically apply for a position like this. If that's not something you are comfortable doing, choose something that you could apply for now, even if it's a slight reach, and just create your resume based on your current standing in life, in your academics, in your work history, your skills and accomplishments and all of that. You want to make sure that you include all of the necessary sections, like your identifying information, education, work experience, and then any of the others that fit, such as your skills and qualifications, awards and accomplishments. You want to organize your content effectively, so figure out the best order to put it in. You want to use headings appropriately. The headings should clearly be headings, and you want to conform to a resume style. You want to use active verbs. You want incomplete sentence structure construction for the most part. Whatever it is you're doing, you want to be consistent all the way through. You do not want to have several different fonts and styles. You want it to be very consistent. There are templates that you may choose to use. Word and I think Google Docs and Pages all have resume templates, and they have a couple different designs you can choose from. You can find templates on the internet, just doing, excuse me, doing a basic web search. You'll be able to find templates. You can use a site like canva.com, and they have many free options that you could use. But I suggest that before you create your resume, you go on LinkedIn and try to find, or other sites, and try to find examples of resumes in that particular field, so you can get a feel for the range of what people are doing. Because what might be common in, say, a graphic arts sort of field might be a lot different than in accounting. So you want to make sure you understand what kind of the industry standard is, because there are some variations. You're going to submit your resume as a Word or PDF document with the job posting and your cover letter by noon on Monday, the 6th of June. You're going to submit them all in one submission. You can attach 3 different documents to one submission, and I will be creating a separate column in the grade book for you to have separate scores for your resume and your cover letter. Since those are technically 2 assignments, you get 2 scores for them, but I want them all together for me to look at as a package. So by noon on Monday, the 6th of June, you should submit your resume. You will also be submitting your cover letter and the job posting. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact me sooner rather than later so that we can get you squared away. And don't forget, you can always take your resume and your cover letter drafts to the Language Arts Lab. They will be glad to help you go through them and see where you can make improvements before you have to submit them. Right.